Hello, my name is Aiden Sauer,
My name is Asha Niemanen.
and we're recording a reflective podcast for our experience in Greece with the UVA Wise crew in the May of 2025.
In this podcast, we'll be reflecting over 4 major sites that we visited during our time in Greece. We'll be talking about the impacts that seeing each of these sites have had on us, and then at the end, we'll circle back around to bigger takeaways that we have gained from this trip.
Let's get started. So, our first location, when we first got off the plane after Copenhagen and landed in Athens, Greece. And woke up early the next morning to go visit the Acropolis.
Which was incredible.
It was.
And we had this amazing tour guide. She was very knowledgeable, and I really appreciated her visuals. That was really big for me to see these sites, which, you always think of the classic sites in Greece as being white marble. The statues are like armless and headless and all these different things. So it's really incredible to see what it would have looked like back then and really understand the beauty of what we're looking at.
Yeah, what we see is not accurate to what was there, which is obviously, but you don't just lose pieces of the building, you also lose the spirit in a sense.
Yeah. And you lose the stories that were carved into those huge frescoes. You really do lose a lot of context, and what we still have that remains, which are mostly columns, are because of the genius way that they were built, which was one of my other big takeaways from this experience, was learning that each column is not, just one huge piece of marble like I always imagined it as a kid, but individual pieces that have pegs through the center to keep it stable, but not too stable. There's still a little bit of wiggle room so that throughout any natural disasters that have occurred in the last 3,000 years, these columns are able to sway and move with the wind or the earthquake or whatever is going on and stay in place. I thought that was super cool.
Yeah.
Like what genius, engineering for so long ago. That is going to continue to be one of my big takeaways from this, is at every site I was so amazed with the architecture and how far humans have been for so long. It's not just how far we've come. I think we always like to think of ourselves in modern day as the smartest we've ever been, and sure, we have computers and all of this nonsense, but a lot of the core intelligence has been here for forever.
Yeah, we haven't always had this achievement, but we have always had this aptitude.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
The intelligence to do crazy stuff. Yeah. Absolutely crazy. What was the one? The Erechtheion is the one that really sat with me. That's been my favorite. The huge statues of the women acting as the columns.
Yeah.
I don't know. That just blew me away. I really appreciated the story, the myth of Athens that we learned there, being, the contest between Poseidon and Athena, and not just, hearing that story without context, but seeing the building that story inspired, having one half of it dedicated to Athena with the olive tree, which I got a cool picture with, that is so incredible, and then the other side being dedicated to Poseidon and his water spring gift. I don't know, it was really interesting to see how much achievement could come out of what I have always thought of as a silly story. I've heard that story since I was in elementary school, maybe. And I don't think that I've ever heard of the Erechtheion. That's never been something, because whenever I think of the Acropolis, we always think of the Parthenon. I think that I always thought that the Parthenon was called the Acropolis because that's the one thing that we always see. Yeah, it's confusing when you're young and you're not actually seeing it, but seeing that it was a rich religious center, and it's not just that these are silly stories to be thrown at you in Percy Jackson books, but they're actually inspiring their art and their architecture and their culture
Absolutely.
and the way that they modeled their society.
And it is an interesting takeaway for me that the Erechtheion is this like religious building that was created based on a religious story at the time and myth now. And that translates into like modern day as like if you have the Sistine Chapel and that's built based around, you know, our religious stories
Yeah.
that are not yet mythology because we still have people who believe in them.
Yeah.
But, you know, if enough time passes, that might turn into mythology. And it's like, wow, you know, if people in the future look back and they're like, these people from way back when, you know, with their limited knowledge of the world,
Yeah.
you know, created this thing based off of their myth, you know, their mythology, their worldview. And it's just a reminder that they had their religion, they had their worldviews that inspired what they did, and we have the same exact thing now. And the only reason it feels any different is because of the passage of time. So we hit the Acropolis. That same day, later in the day, we hit the Agora.
Yeah, the Agora was really interesting. We were talking about how it served as kind of the political center. How, was it the like eldest men between certain ages
Oh, yeah,
would
yeah,
meet
yeah.
up and have like council meetings, and we were talking about like, you know, the likelihood that Socrates had walked somewhere that we had walked.
Yeah.
It was really crazy for me after taking ancient philosophy and really feeling like I understood these characters and what was driving them. I feel like the connection back to Socrates, the philosophers that we've studied so much, kind of broke that barrier of like not knowing what these people were feeling, what they were thinking. You know, you were able to imagine what it might have looked like, what, you know, it would have sounded like with so many people talking over each other and shouting about their different beliefs, and or calmly debating with each other perhaps because they aren't Americans. I don't know.
Yeah. It was really cool to see, you know, where our three big ancient Greeks,
Yeah.
Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and then also the Stoa, where the Stoics came about, and then
Oh, the Stoics.
yeah, and just all these different schools of philosophy that still are extremely relevant and discussed and practiced in different ways in modern day, where they originated from, and standing there just maybe a few, I don't know, dozen feet of extra dirt,
Right?
you know, from the passage of time, but in the about the exact same spot. But yeah, for Athens, with the Acropolis, we had the Agora, a few, you know, other stuff we did, but those were the two significant sites.
Yeah.
And then we caught a ferry, and it was a long ferry ride with not enough sleep.
Yeah.
That then eventually we made it to Santorini. We got dropped off in Fira, got oriented, and then I don't know what day, but we went to Akrotiri.
Yes. Oh, Akrotiri.
Akrotiri is an archaeological dig site, so they, you know, dug up the earth and found remains. Those remains were preserved by volcanic ash. But then under those remains, they found more remains, or ruins, maybe I'll say. And under those, they found more. And, you know, as time went on, it kept getting more and more complex.
How far can
the
you
city,
dig?
Yeah, until it got covered by volcanic ash. And it looks like everyone got out. It was almost a Pompeii situation, but the people evacuated the ancient city before, the volcano covered everything.
Oh, man. I think Akrotiri was my favorite site that we went to, especially because along with being able to walk in the actual dig site where they have kind of catwalks set up above like just the actual archaeological sites, and it seems like they open and close different sections of the dig site as they're actively digging. We also got to go to the museum, which held most of the artifacts that they actually found in Akrotiri. So it was kind of puzzle piecing together this idea of what this place looked like. And I was hit with this idea of timelessness and able to imagine what life looked like for people who lived thousands and thousands of years before me, imagining what the structure of their houses looked like, imagining their working water and sewage systems so long ago. And I think what really, really struck me was seeing the artwork and the tiles and seeing how colorful the insides of the houses were, and imagining, like, you know, this was someone's personalized space that we're imagining. It's not just, you know, this is the religion shared by many people. This was one person's house. They had a screen, a TV screen inside of the archaeological site.
That was an advanced civilization.
Shut up. That would have done numbers on HGTV. I loved that house. But it was this, you know, 3D reconstruction of what this house looked like, along with all of the wallpaper and the paintings and the floor tiles and the way that they found pottery still in cupboards. But I think it just really struck me being able to see this reconstruction and imagining, like I said, this was someone's space. They might have had a family there. They might have been raising their children. They lived their lives. They ate their food there. They had memories. They had conversations. You know, someone's entire life was held in that little room, and I was able to stand there and look down on it and just imagine what it was like to live there. I think that was my timeless moment.
Yeah.
Seeing the colors, it's not just black and white, it's not just mud, it's not dirty. It was someone's house. I don't know. I think a house is a very intimate thing to look in on, you know, being able to see someone's space.
It was really cool to see how real and how, I guess, I don't want to use the term modern, but familiar is the term I want to use. How familiar everything felt. Like, yep, this is what a city feels like, you know? And if it just were uncovered and rebuilt, I wouldn't, you know, besides different tastes and different art styles and a different language, if the people were still around,
Sure.
I wouldn't recognize it as different in any way. It was still fundamentally the same. It's just, you know, time has passed, and that doesn't change. It doesn't change us. I think the big takeaway is humans don't change with the passage of time. It's just our knowledge base and what we're taught changes and our culture changes, but humans don't change.
After our time in Santorini, it was then time to travel by a ferry, which was much faster than the first one, to the island of Crete.
We arrived in Heraklion, and the main site of archaeological significance that we visited was the Palace of Knossos. This site was a Minoan palace that was also, as we were informed, a bit of an archaeological scandal. Sir Arthur Evans went through and I did a little research. He was not the first one. Sir Arthur was not the first one to discover this location. However, he was the one to pick it up. He was from, surprise, surprise, Britain.
Imagine.
And he, after it was discovered, he came in and uncovered most of the palace and had his opinions or his beliefs or his understandings of how things were conducted or constructed, and decided to rebuild the palace instead of leaving everything in its place. And
rather than following the kind of general rule of art restoration, which is to maintain the, you know, quote unquote artist, in this case, the civilian's vision, instead of maintaining what we have left, Sir Arthur took the route of inserting his ideas and building based on his ideas, which, as we learn more about the site, still to this day, we're learning that there is less and less evidence for the claims that Sir Arthur made. But it's difficult because now that it is reconstructed, we put the original site at harm by deconstructing what Sir Evans put in place.
Exactly. So he took ruins, put them in some orientation, which not only takes them out of their original orientation, causing people to lose information as to what was there. So you have less information to work with as you speculate about this past society. But you also put them in a new orientation, leading you to perhaps make presumptions about what the society was like that perhaps are not accurate. And certainly the public coming to visit might be misinformed. However, to the credit of the, Greek government or the government of Crete, there were signs at the archaeological site that talked about what Evans made, reconstructed, and then how other modern scholars disagree with his opinions and theories about what was going on at the palace.
And while it was one of the most grand looking sites that we visited, it was a little bit hard to really feel that dissolution of time that we've been talking about, because suddenly when you hear about Sir Evans and everything that he did, you're unsure of the accuracy of everything standing around you. So while it was amazing, my distrust in the accuracy of the site, I think, really clouded my vision during this trip.
Yeah, I agree. And there was a lot of time spent thinking how much of this is original instead of just appreciating and trying to put the pieces together. You are first doing the legwork of trying to take the pieces apart. You know, some British dude from the 1900s, early 1900s, and then try to imagine what it was like thousands of years ago. It was challenging. Oh, also the location of the goddess, the statue of the snake goddess.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, breasts out, snakes in hand. Very scary, powerful.
I thought she was really
intimidating.
cool.
She looked bad. No.
Later, when we visited the museum, we were able to see another one of Sir Arthur's restorations, which is of what we now know as a blue monkey. But Sir Evans did not have the remaining pieces of things such as a muzzle or ears to indicate that it was a monkey. So seeing this humanoid figure in the painting, he assumes that it must be a little boy and reconstructs it to be, a blue boy climbing through the trees. But as we have discovered more and more of these pieces, we've discovered that the blue beings are certainly monkeys. And a fun detail, if you look at the blue boy reconstruction, is that Sir Evans had the piece of a tail, but clearly would not put a tail on a human boy, but he was so convinced that it was a human boy. So there's a piece of a blue tail flying in the sky, which was my favorite thing.
It is really funny when you look at the painting.
But again, keeping us from reconstructing in a proper way, now that there's already Evans's reconstruction, it's hard to take apart these pieces and reorient them in a way that they're supposed to be, so the monkey's tail will forever be floating through the sky.
Yeah. That's poetic. After our time in Crete, we hopped aboard a plane, Aegean Airlines, and flew up back to Athens. Here, we got on a bus early in the morning, and we drove to Delphi.
Yeah.
When we arrived, I noted that the structures of Delphi, or the location of Delphi, was both made you feel powerful as you are kind of overlooking mountains or a valley, and can see quite far and quite a lot, but also humbled because you are right on the side of a mountain that has a cliff kind of right next to the structures. So there's this balance.
Of feeling both big and small at the same time.
Exactly. It feels like you're kind of centered. Yeah. And, perhaps that is reading too much into it. And it was just because there was natural gas getting people high. And that's why it became...
Whether or not there's poetry behind it, it was a beautiful spot.
Yeah, it was gorgeous. It was captivating and inspiring, and they built some really cool stuff. Yeah, so unlike most of the sites that we visited, we actually explored the museum at Delphi first, and then explored the site, the archaeological site. In the Museum of Delphi, there were several incredible sites, several beautiful remains of structures and statues and other gifts to the god Apollo. Important context for the site of Delphi is it was a place of worship for Apollo and the location of Pythias, who were oracles of Apollo, except they were not called oracles, because an oracle is, in fact, the message you receive rather than the person who gives that message. Important clarification, and people would come from very far to receive these oracles from the Pythias.
And to give gifts as offerings to the god of Apollo to try to turn the gods in their favor.
Precisely. Because this was a place of worship and veneration for Apollo, it, of course, became also a political center for the Greeks. So, because of the religious significance of this location, there came political significance. And city-states, Greek city-states, would compete. They would compete physically. They'd have competitions, and also they would compete politically, maybe I'd say, by giving the best possible gifts to Apollo. So some city-states would create treasuries that have incredible, beautiful, ornate gifts or lots of wealth there. And it was a sign, it was not only, they were double dipping, because it was not only praising Apollo and trying to get favor from the god or the gods, but it also expressed to the other city-states their dominance.
Yeah.
Delphi was also inspiring, perhaps, or incredible, because even though there was so much wealth concentrated there, it sounds like it was not protected heavily or heavily guarded from potential thieves because it was protected by religion. As anyone with Greek heritage at the time would understand that if they went and stole something from Delphi, they would be stealing from Apollo, and no one is in the mood to cross God or gods, essentially. So, maybe no or limited security. I don't remember exactly what the tour guide said, but primarily that location was protected by the religion, the shared religion.
What I found especially interesting about Delphi, because of the nature of the site, because so many people are bringing items to the gods or to the god Apollo, we had this really interesting timeline shown at the museum of art from different times and from different locations. Some of what we got to see were remains of what the site of Delphi once looked like, and then the rest are items from the treasuries. So we're seeing craftsmanship over several hundreds of years, and we're seeing it from several different areas. We're seeing different styles of art, and we're seeing the progression of what people were expressing with their art. And we could see the level of detail, especially as artists became more and more technical through the years, maybe more, I don't know, perhaps there was more food, there are more resources as the society gets bigger and bigger, so they're able to focus more and more on their art. So it goes from looking like the statue equivalent of a stick figure to these incredible Roman statues that we still have today. And being able to look at such a wide variety of styles was really amazing to me.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good point. As when we were navigating through the museum at Delphi, we saw our tour guide would point out what century a statue was from, and what the art standard was for that time. At some point in ancient Greece, there was an ideal body type for young men, I guess, and that is what they were creating. And then they would create statues of slightly more detailed, realistic people. She pointed out how statues of women first were very modest, I guess, quote unquote, and then they progressed to being more, I guess, detailed, because you'd have just like uniform dresses at one point, and then you had wind blowing the dress into the body of,
carving out her figure underneath.
Yeah. And perhaps it became more technically challenging and impressive. And also there was movement to creating not only ideal figures of people, but realistic ones. So eventually, instead of creating this ideal young male statue, it was what people just looked like. And sometimes they were fugly. Sometimes sometimes they were not ideal looking. They just looked like real people. And they had, whatever, I don't know, features they had, asymmetry they had.
One thing that I thought was really cool is walking through this museum, seeing this trend towards more realistic body shapes and being able to identify myself in them and being able to identify you in them, being able to identify all of the people around us, because people are not, cut and dry. We all look different. But I really appreciated, it didn't seem like the body shapes were on either end of an extreme. They just looked healthy. And I found it really reassuring to see, especially statues of Aphrodite, and being able to see the things that I'm the most insecure about on myself, my belly, my thighs, my arms. I was able to see those things in her statue, and I think it gave me a lot of confidence that every woman looks like the goddess of love. I really appreciated that.
Yeah. Now we have gone through and talked about our 4 different major locations that we visited with archaeological significance about the history and politics and philosophy of ancient Greece. We talked about the Acropolis, the Agora, those are of course in Athens, Akrotiri, the archaeological site in Santorini. We talked about Knossos in Heraklion, Crete, and we talked about Delphi. And they were all incredible sites to visit. In our experiences, or from our experiences in Greece, we, or at least I, feel like I learned a lot and had a perspective shift and about Greek culture and history, and also learned a lot about traveling and how to effectively do it, and also how to enjoy it. Because the year previously, you and I both had gone to India and Nepal, and I was on edge very much. As it was my first time out of the country.
No, it's definitely understandable, and there was a lot of culture shock there. I feel like this might have been a little bit less culture shock comparatively. Yeah. How would you compare these 2 trips, your experience of these
interesting.
2 trips?
Oh man, I really wish I had taken Asian philosophy
before
going to India so badly, and knew the difference between the 3 prongs of Buddhism.
Yeah.
Because
I absolutely agree with you. It did feel like coming in from almost no knowledge to that trip was very different from going on this trip after having taken ancient
yes.
philosophy and having a good idea of the people that we're talking about and the social structures that we're talking about. You know, this larger context, having a better understanding of individual people who lived in these places, like how we were talking about Socrates earlier. Yeah, it felt like when we went to India, there was none of that recognition. We were talking about many people who I'm like, I think I maybe remember them from middle school world history. I don't know.
Yeah.
So what we're getting at, I guess, is that we would recommend taking a class
Absolutely.
beforehand.
Yeah. A good takeaway is if you're really trying to appreciate a culture and a school trip and the idea behind it being learning something, and if you're trying to learn about the place you're going to and really suck the marrow out of the bone, having some sort of knowledge, taking a class ideally, because you'll have been introduced to a lot of knowledge, but if that's not possible,
even an individual study.
Yeah, doing some research, asking questions for your professor you're about to go on the trip with, because they are probably knowledgeable and could provide you with a lot of information and would be very excited to as well, because they're about to also go on the trip with you.
And they'll think you're super engaged.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
Yeah, and they'll buy you a drink.
If any students, hopefully, if any students would, if anyone out there is listening who is interested in a study abroad trip, perhaps, we would recommend classes or individual study beforehand on the topics that you might discuss.
Asha, what was the most difficult part of your experience?
Ooh, I think... Okay, this is going to sound like a job interview. I think the most difficult part was also one of the best parts, is that there were so many cool people on this trip, but there were so many different personalities that it was hard to spend time with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So while some people were maybe a little bit quieter and wanted to stay nights in, and some people were more interested in going out and dancing every night, it felt hard to really get the amount of time that I wanted with everyone. I just found it difficult to balance that.
Yeah. It's interesting that the most difficult part for you was not so much about the traveling or the cultural differences, but rather the social navigation with people from your country.
Isn't that funny?
Which is hilarious. But I can relate to that.
Yeah.
It was challenging because I have a drive to socialize and to connect with people, and it was such an incredible environment to be able to freely, meaning have no other responsibilities for 2 weeks, but to have fun and to learn, which is the dream for me, that aristocrat lifestyle.
Aristocrat lifestyle. I like that.
But the most difficult part the most difficult part of my experience, jet lag coming home.
Oh, man.
Was really challenging.
Wait, I take mine back.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's kind of a cheat because we were back home at that time.
Sure.
But if that counts on the tail end, because going to India, the year previous, I had not experienced jet lag.
Yeah.
I think because of the adrenaline and just the wildness. Coming back from India, I hadn't, because it was still in the middle of the semester.
And we had to jump right back into...
into school, so there wasn't time to feel jet lagged.
Yeah.
But coming back from this trip during the summer, where there weren't immediate commitments, that were extremely time sensitive,
to make you wake up or go to sleep at a certain time.
It was quite
work
challenging.
To wear you out.
It was quite challenging. It took days and days to recover from the jet lag. Yeah, that was.
I think
difficult.
I was in it for like a week and a half. It was terrible. Aiden, if you were to start at the beginning of your trip again, what would you do differently the second time around?
I would have lied about my age to get into the museums for cheaper. That's not actually true. They check your ID, so don't do that. I don't know. Yeah, I had so much fun. Oh, Okay, I know exactly what I would have done differently.
Oh, no.
I would have warned everybody in my group that the kids will rob you
Yeah,
because we had
but you didn't know that.
several group. But if I was doing it the second time around, I would know that. If I went back to Greece with the same people during the same time next year, I would say everyone, although I wouldn't have to because they would know. I would say, watch out. The kids will literally rob you and to tell their moms and they will return your phone. That was insane. That was insane.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah. Watch out for the kids, evidently.
Yeah.
Just be mindful of your personal belongings.
Yeah, in any trip, I think that's important. I think you get really used, especially if you have grown up in the Wise area. I feel like a lot of us can get very comfortable in a small town where you know everyone. When you are traveling, please keep in mind that you do not know everyone and you may not always be as safe as you are used to being in a small southern area like this.
I will say, I had a lot less fear of getting shot
That's fair.
because I'm pretty confident I could
That's fair.
beat a kid. Like if we were having a contest to get my wallet back, but I am not confident I could beat assault rifles or handguns.
So
But
don't pack your Kevlar. But
yes, don't pack your Kevlar, but do pack your zipper pockets
Yeah.
and common sense. So, Asha, what did you learn from this trip that you could not have gotten without being there and having this study abroad experience?
I think something that I could not have learned outside of taking this trip was, this conversation that you and I have been having throughout this entire episode is the dissolution of time in front of us. I think a lot of people have this concept of, because someone lived in an ancient time, there's no way that I could understand anything about them. It's so different. They lived in a different country. I would never understand their language or their customs or anything about them. Like, we really tend to separate ourselves from the past, which is something that you discussed. And I really liked the way that you put it earlier in saying, like, just because our means as humans have changed does not mean that we as humans ourselves have changed. We have the same base wants, base needs, need for hope. So we build religion. We need shelter. So we build these amazing cities. We need food. So we're growing, all the time. Even though we have computers now and certainly do not die of dysentery or anything as often, at the end of the day, we are still facing a lot of the same struggles and we have a lot of the same hopes and desires. Humans want to be comforted and loved and understood. And we seek knowledge endlessly. We want to know what happens after death, so we have to have explanations for that, and we build temples around our explanations for that. At the end of the day, ancient Greeks are not so different from you and I, which seems like such a, I don't know.
Cliche?
It's such a cliche. It's the friends we made along the way.
It makes sense though, and yeah, just to reinforce the point, I also felt that and reflected on that after India and Nepal, of like, even though, it's on the other side of the world, language that is not even intelligible to me, seeing the religious ceremonies, seeing people just being people, it was like, yeah, I understood that we are all still humans. We all still do the human thing, and that was contemporary culture, just a different one.
Yeah.
And even across time, it is not like we have grown larger brains. We have simply had more time to generate knowledge about the world. And even like in our modernity, like what we renaissanced. So we rediscovered old knowledge. And then just from there, we've kind of really started to take off with technology. So it's kind of hubris to think that we have just grown as humans when in fact we have just finally coalesced some knowledge to create technology that is now advancing rapidly.
Yeah.
And, it's just, we've created things that are advanced, but we ourselves, humans, intrinsically have not changed at all.
Yeah. And how many times were we beaten down? How many times have we lost our technology? I think of Akrotiri having this amazing water and sewage system that we just lost for a few hundred years.
Right? And just
What?
and just in medieval times dumping your waste right into the street.
I know. How did we revert back from that? How many times will we have to start over and start over again? And how many times do we feel as individuals broken down by a bad grade or losing our jobs? And how human is that feeling? Because imagine the people who made Akrotiri and they filled their shelves with pots and they painted their floors and they painted this beautiful mural in their house and they have this amazing system. They're trading so far at this point, like an impressive amount of distance. They're having trade and cultural exchange. I mean, this was a very advanced society in that time. And imagine everyone moving out and losing that.
Yeah.
And moving on and rebuilding.
The volcano coming in. And also, Akrotiri, from my memory, was built, there was like a very old civilization, and then earthquake leveled it, and then a medium old civilization, earthquake leveled it, and then the most recent one before the volcano came in. And it's like, humans also keep persisting.
Yeah.
And even when they know it's probably not going to work out, they keep doing it anyways. And it's like, you kind of kick the can down the road because you're like, well, yeah, the next earthquake will come. And maybe they didn't know, but it sounded like maybe they didn't know. Maybe they were building on something and they had no idea it was there. Or maybe they were like, yes, this got destroyed, but we're going to try to build it again, And that persistence and the trade and the culture and the art and the creativity, a big takeaway for me was, once again, it sounds cliche, but we really are all connected. And it's like, I mean, how many generations was it ago? Like less than 1,000, right? Less than 500? I don't know. How many generations ago was that? Was those ancient civilizations that we looked at, that we got to experience? And in how many generations will what the technology and knowledge we have today seem like completely inadequate? Like, so how ignorant will we seem in a generation, in 2, in 5, in 100?
Or will it all get destroyed and be refound and we'll be seen as geniuses during a renaissance? Yeah,
will we have some nuclear fallout and then a renaissance part 2?
We don't get to decide that. We don't get to decide how all of this goes, but we continue persisting anyways.
No.
Just like they did. I think we learned a lot about human nature overall, not just personal nature. I think a lot of people say human nature and they mean how I feel and not how everyone feels. It's like when people say, like, human nature is to be greedy, so that's why capitalism works so well. It's like, no, that's just you.
Right. Maybe not human nature, but human essence. Because everyone has different predispositions or inclinations, but every person in the world has felt scared or hungry or thirsty and hopefully love and some core experiences that no matter how much time or language barrier there is, can transcend everything. And that's a big takeaway for me. And for you too, it sounds like.
Yeah. And how amazing that human persistence got so far that so many of these temples and archaeological sites are still here today for us to look at.
Those people had no idea, but they created something that would persist long after their deaths. And even though we do not know their names, we know something about them.
Well, thank you for tuning into this podcast. This was Aiden Sauer and
Ashen Evening.
talking about and reflecting on our experiences in Greece in the May of 2025 with the UVA crew under the, supervision of Dr. Anthony Cascio and Dr. Heather Evans. Y'all did great work. I had so much fun.
Yeah, this was an incredible experience. We had such a great group. We ate so much amazing food. And obviously the things that you showed us sparked a long conversation that we will continue to be having for years and years on these topics.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you for Italy.
Yes! Yes!
Hopefully this podcast is so good that
It
we can
convinces
go
you
to
to take
Italy
us to
for
Italy.
free. Whoa.
Italy scholarship?
What?
What?
Thanks for tuning in.
Okay, love you, bye.
Adios.